Alright, hello, and before this information gets stale or I forget too much of why I did it this way, I'm going to run through what I ran through as I put together the construction drawings that I've sent over, the ones dated 9/18. First of all, with regard to this door, the last time I had a 4-panel door showing here. I'm showing as a 3-panel door, and that's what I continued to do through it. The reason I did that, if you may recall from the last film, was that offered the widest possible opening. Once we open that to 12 foot wide and accommodate that with a beam. The 3-panel door, from almost any manufacturer, is going to offer the widest net clear opening. In this case, it's over 3 feet. So that is what I used, and then later on, when I was showing some other of these slides, looking toward that, I kind of like that there are actually 3 little arches inside under that steel beam as well. So I ran with a 3-panel door, but one of the first things I discovered when I started trying to put the drawings together is that we weren't going to be able to support this end of that big ridge beam the way we were in the past, because in the past we had an attic to go into and we were building a new wall and etc. Now it has to come into this existing second floor wall, and then its bearing has to come down through here. What that means, because I tested it and it can't bear on just a couple joists up there. That point load of about 5,000 has to be carried all the way down to the header across the new doorway, presumably if that doorway is put in, and I can't imagine it's not. So we have to, when that doorway is cut, you have to cut wider on each side by 4 inches or so that you can put in 3-inch blocking for these beams. Now originally I was showing this as a 2 14s, but when I began to see this alignment here, I wanted to hopefully use it. I'm using the shorter Pellador and all sorts of brands, but I'm using the shorter Pellador, which is only 7 to 9.5 inches tall. And so 2 14s or 3 11s, it's a little bit more expensive to use 3 11 1/4s, but that's what I did. I shifted those to 3 11 1/4s, and those will go out, and then outside that door gets cased on the outside as well, because it doesn't fit back in there. I mean, you might be able to do any number of creative things in terms of how to accommodate that out there. But this is how I did it, and that's how I did it. You're not going to probably have this brick across here because you have to put a new lintel in. It doesn't matter, because we need our beam in this region here where this brick is. So one way or another, that has to be accommodated, and that is a start, but we need that framed all the way down so that we can put those 3 11 1/4s in there. Next, this is when I was still thinking I was going to be able to lower this down 2 stairs. I had just started on this without knowing what was going to happen, and I put this together first, this bit here, but then I began to think about lowering this and recognized it just wasn't going to be possible since we were no longer coming out southward 10 feet. And even here, I've scraped this ground away, and I'm not sure you can even do that. Yeah, you can see I've scraped that ground away. Right now, over by the door, this ground is up level with the door. So even to put this deck level with the door, some of that ground needs scraped away. Or you've got to bury you can put your framing in and then refill it if you wanted to. It's all ground contact lumber. And that was where we were the last time. Step downs, this 7.5, 2 step downs. I'm just looking at this right here. This is your floor surface in here. And if they had the dirt was up to that surface right now, and it is at the back wall, I don't have a lot of reason to expect that they would build this foundation, that rear foundation wall, any deeper than they needed to. I'm showing it 3'2", but they might have only built at the bare minimum 3 courses back here. So if somebody wants to check that, it kind of would give you a good heads up on what's going to happen. But right away, regardless of that, I knew that we're not going to be able to come down that far. I mean, I guess probably horsed around with, you would have to, if you wanted to come down those 2 steps, you would have to undercut that rear foundation wall and put in some sort of piering like this at some specified interval. And here was it. Here was the plan last time when the railing was still outside. And this was a good idea and a sensible one, of course, to move that inside. And I really liked that. And I didn't like that much. I mean, this was tolerable when it was that, but I still was not thrilled about it. This does make that skirting easier. Okay, so we don't have to fasten that skirting to a concrete wall. And the railings, I've left these like this. And one thing, you might have to come out a little further than this because they want at least an inch, I think, maybe even a little bit more than that, behind that railing for this obstruction, maybe a couple deck boards. These are just those hollow aluminum or stainless steel tubes with the fasteners going through it. Now all of this railing that I'm showing through any of this, you can either put those newels together yourselves with framing coming up through here with 4x4 and a sleeve, but this is a 5/4 by 6 on top of it, or you can get something from a manufacturer to do all that. Okay, so yeah, at that point, once I had that deck raised up the extra 2 risers that it absolutely needed to go up, this started to look like this. And then I went down a whole path, and the construction drawings are based on what I ended up with at the end of all of these slides, because I followed a number of pathways. And I guess the first thing I did though is this is too far. This is 5.5 or 6, almost 6 foot, which is too far to stretch those cable rails. So the first thing I did, I moved that back to the west, so we were able to put an extra newel in here and get that where it needed to be to hold that. And this one now is the same distance from that, so I kind of like that. We still have this column here, and that's what I began to horse around with, or mess around with, I believe, as I went forward. Leaving that alone for a minute though, this was how it was the last time. This is a 2nd floor deck, and this is how I had this, where this was a wall or a railing across here. And maybe that still makes the best sense, but I did what I could to make this a different sort of situation than that. So you step down from either of these places then, and I'm not sure how this is all finished out in the plans. It's finished a little different than that. The main thing is it comes around this column has to stay, it's necessary, as does that one there. But these ones on this side don't necessarily have to stay there. And that's the beamwork now. And I tested what it would take to just bring that beam across so that we could get rid of that front column at least. That's where I began, is getting rid of that front column. And the only way I was able to really, and so there is, where it comes across there, there's this little detail of flashing. It's only about 8 inches long, and it comes in under the gutter and over whatever that beam ends up going over to there. However, this beam can only be 9¼ inches tall max, because it begins to intrude on the gutter, and you can see that the roof can't go up any further. So no matter what happens, that has to be maximum of 9¼ high. It doesn't matter that you can move this deck up. The problem is right here, getting under this and attaching to this. But I designed a couple things with that 9¼ inch high, and if you want, the only way I was able to do that with regular conventional lumber and not LVLs, because when you go to an LVL, You could probably just use standard LVLs because there's just so little exposure, but you would have to somehow flash off the top of that underneath those joists. And that's probably possible too. But otherwise, you could use an exterior LVL, which they make. But I tried to keep everything just using conventional lumber, and that means a couple 2x10s, which meant I had to reduce both how big this deck projected forward of this and what the loading was on that. Now if you use the LVLs, you could have this could be as larger than, I reduce it down, but if you wanted it larger, it can go back up if you go to the LVLs for these beams that carry across. And that's if you agree with this idea of eliminating these extra columns here on the interior. These are the pressure treated. If I load this at 40 pounds per square feet, and I have to say if you have stairs coming down here, then it will be necessary to have this rated at 40 pounds per square feet, is my guess, because it's accessible like that. If it's in a bedroom, I was pretty sure I can get away with just having the loading at 30 pounds per square foot. And so that's what I did in order to get where I went, which was a couple 2x10s on each side of those. This is how, when I just took out the front one and just had that going through, and I don't know if that's bothersome or not. I felt like the column was a little more bothersome than this. Particularly, as I said, I'll try not to forget various things I was thinking of when I went through this. So there they both are, this one and that one. And I knew I could get rid of that front one with this here, and I can get rid of the back one as well. Looking from this side, taking some of these out, and then you can see the overhang here is that big 2-foot overhang. And that was fine when we had our own columns at this end. But if we want to do this where we hang this column on this beam here, then that overhang can't be that large, or we're going to use LVLs. But that takes out both those close ones and just has two big beams coming back to the main LVL. And that's the detail there, and you can see it was a little too tall to fit the gutter, so some special arrangements had to be made there. This is 11¼ inch fascia board here, and it just has to get cut out down through here to allow for this flashing, etc. And I kind of did something like this. This is the gutter up here, I believe. Yeah. This was one of the flashing details I worked out for that little 8-inch section, just standard drip edge, and one by and then flashing on top of it. But you can almost just use a decking board for that matter. You can almost see it here, right here. And that's that drip edge and decking board. Now, this is kind of a game of inches, because this downspout has to come down from that second floor gutter here, and then when that beam at the back comes through, there's the spout that comes off of this gutter here, the downspout that comes off of this gutter here, has to get to the left to miss that gas or that electric meter that's down below. But there's plenty of room for that to be done in behind this bit here. And this was the photograph that showed those 3 arches inside mirroring themselves on this 3-panel door, which is why I liked it at the end. And the reason I like getting rid of this one, and this one's kind of just was so extraneous anyway, the reason I kind of like it, for one thing, I don't think you're going to be seeing that as much. I don't think you're going to be seeing this view as much as you're going to be seeing from this view anyway. And I kind of like how this kind of introduces and pulls a person this way, or just is more of a progression that way without this, at least this oddball column here. And those two could be totally eliminated. They're not, because these beams here that are carrying, I have those penetrating into the house and bearing on the house framing inside. So these ones don't need to be there, but then you lose some of your symmetry looking at the fireplace for sure. Out here I looked at this and I knew I was going to have to build regular foundation for this bit here. I didn't think there was going to be a way to do that with just wood framing all the way down through the foundation. So that changed around and I put a regular 8-inch CMU foundation. You could probably build it out of 6-inch CMU, but I built it out of 8 and came up to the bottom of the floor joists. Well, the mud sill plus the CMU wall came up to the bottom of the new deck floor joists, and those floor joists went across there. This was just some dimensions for you to see or reference at some point if you want to reference it. Some of that's going to be in the drawing anyway. Where this chimney is, I've built this chimney on 2 stages. I don't know, maybe you put plywood down first or whatever, but I have it built, the framing built right on the deck framing, and then coming up 8'4", and you really can't come up 8'4½", so you got to cut the 2x4s. Coming up 8'4", and then building the second section 4'4½" on top of that, with these studs just coming down between these rafters. So that's that area there. And you see what I finally ended up doing is using a big lintel on this door here, with the new hardy siding coming down to the top of that drip edge on that. Because the door can't go any taller, but we definitely have to cover up to that siding. And this had been a tall 14 or 16-inch piece of like Miratech up here, but if you were using more conventional sizes, what I end up showing is a 1x12 and a 5/4 by 4. And this is the view from that side. I guess we go through a few things here. I like these. This is kind of what the step down would be. I think is the best we're going to get with that. Then I continue to carry this through, and there's my other looks. Hopefully this is the right photograph numbers. So over here, you know, this grade comes up so high that I just have those piers coming up, and the framing is bearing directly on the piers. And you can see what's happening there. So that's when I just bring that concrete sidewalk all the way forward to that decking. There's how I put together the framing for that. This is kind of the roof beams. These are the flanking beams. These are just the 2x8 pairs here, and the LVLs at the top, and the big 2 14-inch LVLs here. This middle one, which has a post that goes up, or framing that goes up to support this, same at this end. This middle one I have going to the outside of that 4x4 for full 3.5 inches bearing, and then these things here are only carrying nothingness, and so those could be box beams, or you can hang these with, I show them hanging those with concealed flange hangers at each end on either this or the column, as far as that goes. On this end here with these 2x8s, that column would actually come up, it would come to the bottom of this, it would come all the way up to the bottom of the 2x8s that go that way, and then these 2x10s are suspended on that interface. And this looks at some of how much yeah, at this end you can see I have you know, this framing is stacked on top of one another. These two ledgers are stacked on top of one another, and they are bearing directly on a pier here. Same with that ledger there is bearing on a pier there. And the way these columns come down from the second floor deck, I have those bearing on a couple of double 2x8s, and so they can be connected directly to that. And the same thing happens with, I changed all those upper columns from 6x6 to 4x4, and so that we can just attach those to our beams, to each of our beams, or just get an attachment to that. These are horizontals. I show a 2x8 horizontal and a 2x6 horizontal to carry that vertical skirting, if that's what you end up doing. But there's how many holes you have. I suppose these could be a couple 12s instead of 3 9s. And there were so many different sizes I had no choice but to just label them on the plan. And all the ones back against the wall. This is a 12 at the end, but all these ones are 16s. All these ones at the back are 16s. And then most of the others are 24s. Except these ones down here, these two middle ones are 28s, and I still haven't figured out how to make that any less than that. And I'm not sure what this film was. I'll probably put that together and see what it is and include it. If not, though, I wanted to show you a few other things. I wanted to say that, you know, I left this all the same, but it is rather a game of inches here, and this is going to have to be kind of mapped out for sure so that we know this is true, because you can see how close it is down here. And I suppose it's not the end of the world if it's this way or that way, but it's just something to keep in mind. The same thing applies for how it all actually comes together at the corner with this stair, because we can't be absolutely positive of that yet. And this was apparently a film that I had made, a turnaround that I had made when all of those little columns were still in place. And they are fine to me to be staying in place when I look at them this way as well. And maybe there'll be a short turnaround with those gone. One quick thing I want to say that occurred to me during making this film, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't say so, is with regard to this door. Now that this space has become less high, I'd like to have that door as high as possible, but of course we're limited by this header. But now that we're cutting this wall, so we have bearing all the way over and all through the whole thickness of that 8-inch wall, it is possible to move that header up into the wall. Now this was Pella's standard size, but that led me to look at some other sizing alternatives. I'm wondering, because Pella makes, you know, a 6'10" and then an 8 foot, and I was hoping somebody made a 90, and I think some of these people, they just make this whatever size you want. And you can see that there's just a whole variety of different things that can be done with that opening, including, you know, folding doors and all of this sort of thing. See if they have any. They're just various pocket and stack configurations and sliding back like this, and we have the whole thickness of that wall to work with. So that header that has to go over there to hold up the end of this beam can go up into the wall, but then it's also, which it was already sized to hold these as well. So where it's located doesn't matter. So I have it pushed up into the wall, and really for the work, a person may as well do that if they can get a higher door. And so I don't know, that probably bears some looking at. And this is Jeld-Wen's all vinyl, which is not, it's not the most expensive line. For example, I'm pretty sure there's at least one or two manufacturers that make standard sizes in 90 inches or 92 inches. And I'm not and if you could get this is that 8-foot Pella. But if you could get it in, say, that's 88 inches high there. If it didn't matter, if it came one way or another, if you just told them what size you wanted, this one's 88 inches high, which makes a pretty big difference from that. Definitely makes a big difference, and depending on what you want to do there. But those beams will handle anything that you want to do in this opening up to 12 feet wide. Alright, that's it for that. This is a walkthrough as well. And I'm not going to make a lot of commentary during this, except to note that those big, once we bring down that ceiling and that beam, those big 8-inch columns, and once I reduced those to 4x4s, which is all that was necessary, I would like to see those columns also done in that smaller, right now they're showing 5.5 or they're showing 7 or 8 inches. And I would like to see those at the small size, which would be 5.5 inches. But I didn't show that simply because that gets so short between there. I also contemplated treating this space between us once I had gotten this set up like this. I did want to see what kind of effect. I knew that was going to be a sunny area anyway, and I wanted to see if there was some way to kind of join that area with the other. And the way it worked out, if I put those beams, this one that's already has been showing through this film, I mirror another one at the end of that bar the same way, and I just finish building this pergola structure, which can be of any kind of material. But it does give you a place to hang things up and kind of unifies these spaces. And the way it works out, this beam here, when it's symmetrical with that bar area, with that whole cooking area there, this beam dives straight into dead center of this shed, if I've got that shed right. But I did want to show a little bit with that just to get an idea for the future, because if we're going to think of something like this, we have to make sure that these beams are heavy enough. And finally, with regard to that, if we add stairs to this, you know, this has to go up in its loading, so there's going to be an LVLs involved or something else might happen. But at this point, if I was going to put kind of a structure like this, of some type like this, I would endeavor to bring my stairs out this way. I don't think I'm going to be able to bring them out and then get you back down low enough to come underneath this bit here. So I think you have to come down almost facing the shed door. But I haven't even looked at that because I want to see where we are now. That's it. I'm not returning to the plan. This film is over. And thanks very much. It's been a pleasure. And hopefully this will get built. But yeah, even here you can see, I think the smaller columns would help along here. And then we have a uniform, all the columns are the same through the thing. But that is it. Let me know. I will talk at you. Sorry for the delay.